UN Chief António Guterres, in the exclusive interview with CNA, has appealed to countries to respect values in the UN Charter and international law as he details the changes needed within the organization to better represent the current reality.
I think we need to affirm more than ever the Charter, the values of the Charter, international law and international humanitarian law. And more than ever, it's necessary to appeal to the global conscience in order to make sure that the Charter and its values prevail, that international law prevails, that international humanitarian law prevails, and that those that violate these sacred principles have face accountability. Unfortunately, in the present situation, as there is no respect, as there is a sense of impunity, we see all these violations without any kind of accountability.
When we talk about appeal to the global conscience, I'm reminded of what you said after the Russian invasion, the full-scale invasion in 2022. You appealed to Vladimir Putin. You said, in the name of humanity. Now, you got no answer to that. So the global conscience is clearly dead on this one. Implementation. Someone has to be one of the four policemen in the founding Roosevelt, US president, mentioned in that time. We don't have that, do we?
But again, the question is simple. It's a question of an invasion that violates the Charter. The Charter is clear about the territorial integrity of states that must be respected. It violates international law. And once again, we see that the international system is not able to make sure that those that violate the Charter, those that violate the international law, face any kind of accountability.
Apart from failure to implement, so in the instance of Russia and Ukraine, Russia is one of the 5 permanent members on the UN Security Council. It in the very founding, the structural foundation of the Security Council, 5 permanent members. If even one gives a veto, then a resolution cannot go through. Now, there's lots of calls over the decades for structural reform. In your time as UN chief, this is not something realistically you could have hoped for, or
and
am I wrong?
Still hope for. I mean, there is one thing, for instance, that is absolutely outrageous. When the UN was created, very few African countries existed. Most African countries were under colonial rule. And today we still have not one single African permanent member of the Security Council. This is unacceptable. This must be corrected. So it's time to adjust the composition of the Security Council to the reality of today's world. And a few years ago, when I started my mandate, this was a taboo. Nobody was ready to discuss it. Recently, we had a session in the Security Council, promoted by Sierra Leone, in which the question was exactly the need to correct the structural injustice made to Africa not to have any member of the any permanent member of the Security Council, and everybody, including the permanent members, including the P5, agreed. So now I have the hope, and I hope the Summit of the Future will be also an impulse in that direction. I have the hope that there will be a serious discussion on how to reform the Security Council and make it more corresponding to what it is today's world, and at the same time to have some improvement in its rules and its procedures to make it more effective.
I think I'm going to quote you on this. You have mentioned, looking back almost fondly to the time when under Clinton in 1999, the US could go in forcefully, decisively in East Timor. But you said that moment of unipolarity, of US power, now that is over now. And you lamented, I mean, most of us think multipolarity, that is the answer to things. Balance, check and balance. Multipolarity, at least in terms of international global governance, that has in fact led to deadlock. If 5 members right now on the Security Council cannot reach agreement, can more members, adding Asia Pacific, Africa, would that be the answer?
Sorry, but we are not in a multipolarity moment. We are in a chaotic moment. I lived a bipolar world in the Cold War. It's true that Soviet Union and the United States were fighting each other by proxy in many situations, but whenever there was a serious problem and that to be solved, they would come together and solve it. Remember the agreements on disarmament, remember the agreement on South Africa, Angola, Namibia and Cuba that solved one of the most difficult conflicts that we had in Southern Africa. Now, then I lived a period of American supremacy, and indeed, in East Timor, the moment the President of the United States decided that an intervention was necessary, everybody accepted. The Security Council voted unanimously, there were no geopolitical divides, Indonesia accepted it, Australia led it, and the Timorese people was rescued, and independence became a reality. Now, today, we are no longer bipolar, we are no longer unipolar, but we are not yet multipolar. We are chaotic. The truth is that we live in a situation in which practically there are no rules. And the fact that we live in this kind of chaotic situation, because multipolarity is something that creates an equilibrium, that creates a balance, and that allows for a negotiation. That's not what we are witnessing today. Witnessing today is each one doing what each one wants, without any kind of consultation, without any kind of the normal and the logic functioning of a multipolar society.
So what's the United Nations doing amidst this world of supreme chaos?
Well, what we try to do, first of all, is affirm the values. We must be the guardians of the values, because without values, everything is lost. And I repeat, the Charter, international law. But also, we need to go on fighting for peace in all circumstances in which we can fight for peace. And sometimes we have a good result. Look at Colombia. There was a peace that was made between the government and the FARC. So peace is possible when there is dialogue, when there is goodwill, when there is the combination of factors that allows it to become a reality. Then we have a dramatic situation because of conflict with huge humanitarian consequences. And the UN has a remarkable humanitarian role. Half of the international humanitarian aid is done through the UN. Look at the World Food Programme and what they have done against hunger. Look at the World Health Organization, what they did in relation to the distribution of vaccines for COVID. Look at UNICEF and the rights of children. United Nations High Commission for Refugees and the support to refugees all over the world. I am proud with what the UN is today able to do to rescue lives in so many difficult circumstances, with UN staff in the most remote and dangerous places of the world, sometimes dying to the benefit of the people that are in trouble, that are in vulnerable conditions. And on the other hand, the UN is promoting a number of very important initiatives. We have now the Summit of the Future. We are discussing the reform of the international financial architecture, how to create a world with more justice and equity in the global economy, how to create a world in which it's possible for developing countries have access to the resources that are needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so the UN is very actively engaged in all these initiatives in order to do our best for peace and security, sustainable development and human rights to prevail, knowing that it's difficult, knowing that it's tough, but we will never give up.
All right, final question here. Loss of trust in the ability of any institution leads to loss of faith in the values that underpin those very institutions. As you mentioned, these things, for example, sustainable development, poverty, development, education, women's rights, these things take time to achieve, and the results of which take time to show. In that time, the UN has to show it is succeeding in keeping the faith. Are you communicating that clearly enough so that you can buy time for those successes to show? Final question.
Allow me to say something. There is no lack of faith on the values. What there is lack of faith because of the cynicism of those that are supposed to apply their values and fail to do it because of their interests.